Chapter 5, The Perfect Punishment. The goblins' eyes lit up when they saw the basket. Inky grinned and winked at Kirsty and Rachel. She knew what they were doing. Those jelly beans look yummy, Inky sang out to the goblins. I wish I could have one. Be quiet, snapped the goblin with the bigger nose. He turned to the other goblin. You hang on to the fairy while I go get those beans. No, said the other one. You're going to eat them all. You hold on to the fairy. I'll go get the beans. No, roared the first goblin. Then you'll eat all the beans. Glaring at each other, both goblins let go of Inky and ran towards Rachel. She quickly threw an armload of beans onto the ground and backed away. The goblins bent down and grabbed the beans, and when they stood up again, Rachel threw another armful back down the hill, away from Inky. Those greedy goblins just couldn't resist the yummy jelly beans. While the goblins were busy stuffing themselves, Kirsty rushed over and untied Inky. Are you all right? She asked. Inky nodded and wiggled her feet free from the licorice ropes. Oh, thank you, she said. Rachel put the basket on the ground and ran over to Kirsty and Inky. The goblins pounced on the basket and began arguing over the rest of the jelly beans. Let's get out of here before they realize that Inky's free, Rachel said. Suddenly, there was a gentle flapping noise overhead. Rachel looked up to see a huge butterfly with pink and gold wings fluttering above them. On its back sat a fairy with long red hair. The butterfly landed lightly on the ground, and the fairy climbed off of the butterfly's back and smiled at Inky and the girls. She wore a long green and gold dress and a tiara. Hello, she said. I am the Sugar Plum Fairy. She looked sternly at the goblins who were crouched beside the empty jelly bean basket. And what are you doing in the land of sweets? She demanded. The goblins didn't answer. They were too busy groaning and holding their stomachs. Oh, groaned the goblin with the big nose. My tummy hurts. Mine too, whined the other one. I feel sick. They ate too many jelly beans, Inky said, grinning at Rachel and Kirsty. The Sugar Plum Fairy looked even angrier. You must be taught a lesson, she said to the goblins, since you have stolen so many of our delicious jelly beans. Why don't you make them go pick more jelly beans? Inky suggested. Oh, what a good idea, said the Sugar Plum Fairy with a smile. Well, that doesn't seem like a very bad punishment, Kirsty whispered to Rachel. Yeah, but just look at the goblins' faces, Rachel whispered. The goblins looked horrified at the thought of more jelly beans. They tried to get up like they wanted to run away, but the Sugar Plum Fairy waved her hand, and a few elves came running forward from the jelly bean fields. They marched the goblins into the nearest field and handed them empty baskets. With sulking faces, the goblins started to pick the jelly beans. Serves 'em right, Inky laughed, and then she looked worried again. But I still have to get back to my rainbow sisters. Please, can you help me get back to Rainspell Island? Rachel asked the Sugar Plum Fairy. We would use the fairy magic to fly back, but we don't know how to get there. The beautiful fairy nodded. We will send you home by balloon, she said, and she waved her wand at the empty jelly bean basket, and Rachel and Kirsty watched in amazement as it grew bigger and bigger. But where's the balloon? Asked Rachel. The Sugar Plum Fairy pointed to a tall tree covered with pink blossoms. Ooh, those are pretty flowers, Kirsty said. But then she took a closer look and she began to laugh. Wait, those are not flowers. They're pieces of bubble gum. How's that going to help? Rachel was confused. Inky grinned at them, her eyes sparkling mischievously. Leave it to me, she said. She pulled one of the bubblegum flowers off the tree and popped it into her mouth and began to chew. Then, squeezing her eyes shut tight, Inky blew a huge purplish blue bubble. She puffed, and the bubble grew bigger and bigger, and soon it towered above them. It was the biggest bubble Rachel and Kirsty had ever seen. Inky took the bubble out of her mouth and tied a knot in the end. The perfect balloon, she said. Now, we're ready to go. Rachel and Kirsty grinned at each other. What a wonderful way to travel back to Rainspell Island. The elves helped tie the bubblegum balloon onto the basket, and then Rachel, Kirsty, and Inky climbed inside. The Sugar Plum Fairy waved her wand at the balloon, showering it with golden sparkles. The balloon will take you back to Rainspell Island, she explained. Good luck. Goodbye. Thank you, called Rachel and Inky, but Kirsty was looking around in dismay. But there's no wind, she said. We're not going to be able to get off the ground. Next chapter is Chapter 6, The Bubblegum Balloon. Chapter 6, The Bubblegum Balloon. Rachel looked over at the leaves on the bubblegum tree. Kirsty was right. They weren't moving at all. The sugar plum fairy smiled. Rachel, don't you remember what you have in your pocket? She said. Oh, of course, Rachel exclaimed. The magic fan. She took it out of her pocket and unfolded it, and then she flapped it under the balloon. Whoosh! A blast of air filled the balloon up and lifted it into the sky. Goodbye, Kirsty called, waving at the sugar plum fairy and all the elves. Thank you for all your help, Inky said. Sorry I made such a mess. And then she giggled. The balloon bobbed slowly upward. As it got higher, the wind became stronger, and so Rachel put the fan back into her pocket. Big, puffy clouds began swirling around the balloon. We'll be home soon, Rachel said, trying to sound cheerful. The wind roared around them, rocking the basket from side to side. Rachel, Kirsty, and Inky hung onto one another and squeezed their eyes shut, and then all of a sudden the wind dropped and the balloon stopped swaying. The air felt warm. Kirsty opened her eyes. We're home, she gasped. They were back in Rachel's attic bedroom at the mermaid cottage. The balloon in the basket had vanished, and the book of fairy tales was laying on the floor, open to the Nutcracker. But where's Inky? Rachel said. I'm in here, said a small, cheerful voice. The Indigo Fairy popped right up out of Rachel's pocket. She wiggled out and fluttered into the air, her wings sparkling with rainbows and showering the room with fairy dust ink drops. The smell of blackberries filled the air as they popped. Kirsty picked up the book and she turned the pages until she found the land of sweets. It's a shame we didn't get to taste any of that wonderful candy, she said. As she spoke, a tiny puff of powdered sugar floated up out of the book, and then a shower of different-colored jelly beans fell onto Rachel's bed. They must be a present from the sugar plum fairy, Inky laughed. Rachel and Kirsty each popped a jelly bean into their mouth. They were tiny, but they were delicious. Yum, said Inky, munching on a bean. Can we take some back to the pot for my sisters? Rachel nodded. Yeah, let's go right away, she said, filling her pockets with jelly beans. Your sisters will be waiting for you. She looked at Kirsty and smiled. They had escaped the goblins and rescued another fairy. They'd been inside of a fairy tale, and now there was only one more fairy to find. Rachel and Kirsty were so close to bringing color back to fairyland. So close, they could almost taste it. That's the end of the story of Inky the Indigo Fairy. Our next story will be called Heather the Violet Fairy.